we get a few more members of Congress, we'll get started. Good morning. Imagine we'll have some more members shortly. The important ones are here. And we appreciate everyone for being here. This past March, the Committee on Small Business held a hearing on the Paperwork Reduction Act, or PRA, to examine how federal paperwork requirements continue to be a burden for small businesses. Even though the PRA is supposed to reduce paperwork burdens, small businesses are still faced with an overwhelming amount of paperwork requirements each day. In fact, paperwork requirements are costing America almost $120 billion a year. But as we heard at our hearing last March, this number is probably much higher because federal agencies may not be accurately estimating the burden. Yes, agencies need data and information to run their programs, but as with all things in life, it must be in moderation. The need for this information must be balanced against the burden imposed to comply with these collection efforts, especially the burden imposed on small businesses, our nation's job creators. As our hearing in March demonstrated, federal paperwork requirements come in many different forms, no pun intended. For example, laws such as the Clean Air Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, and the Endangered Species Act require small businesses to prepare lengthy permitting applications. Some applications can be thousands of pages long. Small businesses are also subject to many different record-keeping and reporting requirements for numerous federal agencies, including the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, the Internal Revenue Service, the Environmental Protection Agency, and others. Not only do small businesses have to keep piles of paperwork and records for many years, they also have to figure out which agency needs the information and how often. Many times, small businesses have to send the same information to different agencies. There's a lot of paperwork. Small businesses should be focusing their efforts on developing, innovating, and building, on creating jobs and growing our economy. Instead, small businesses too often are devoting precious hours and dollars every month to filling out forms, applications, and reports. Meanwhile, agencies issue more and more paperwork requirements. Today, this committee is pivoting to hear the federal agency perspective. Specifically, we have 4 agency officials who are responsible for ensuring that their agencies comply with the Paperwork Reduction Act, PRA. Under the PRA, the agency's Chief Information Officer, or CIO, is responsible for ensuring that the agency complies with the Act. The CIO must determine whether collecting certain information is necessary, how the agency plans to use the information, and estimate what the burden will be on those who provide the information. Only after the CIO reviews the collection request and certifies that it meets certain requirements can the agency propose the collection request to the public. In other words, the CIO and his or her team have an important role in helping to reduce the paperwork burden on this country's small businesses. I want to thank all our witnesses for being here today. We look forward to hearing your testimony about how your agency complies with the PRA and ways your agency reduces the paperwork burden on small businesses. And I would now like to yield to the ranking member, Ms. Velasquez, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In 2015, the public spent an estimated 9.78 billion hours responding to federal information collections. While some of this information was required as disclosures, others were eligibility in programs or applying for loans. Whatever the reason for businesses preparing these documents requires staff, time, and money. This is felt most acutely by small businesses who frequently lack the legal support and resources their larger competitors have to assist with compliance. The Paperwork Reduction Act, or PRA, was created in 1980 and amended in 1995 with the intent of reducing the growth of paperwork. The results have been mixed at best. One question I hope today's hearing can answer is whether current law provides agencies with the appropriate tools to address the escalation of paperwork, or if changes must be made to the PRA to improve its effectiveness. Additionally, it will be of great value to hear how agencies strive to keep small businesses' needs in mind when crafting regulations. As they say, the devil is in the details. When it comes to complying with many federal reporting requirements, small adjustment can make a difference in reducing the burden on small firms. While agencies face a difficult task, small businesses deserve to know exactly why their paperwork burden continues to grow. However, we must also remember that data collection exists for a reason. Agencies rely on data to make informed decisions, achieving important policy outcomes. These goals include ensuring worker safety, preserving clean air and water, and safeguarding taxpayer dollars against fraud. Yet, the PRA should not serve to discourage agencies from conducting proper regulatory flexibility analysis. All too often, we see agencies implementing regulations that ignore or understate economic impacts on small businesses. Ensuring that agencies are considering the economic impact of their regulations and paperwork requirements on small firms is critical. Congress needs to know what steps are needed to help agencies achieve this goal, whether it is embracing technology, working to synchronize and coordinate at all levels of government, or improving communication. It is an important discussion we must have. I look forward to the insights this panel will provide on those topics, and once again, thank the witnesses for being here today, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady yields back, and if members have opening statements, I would ask that they be submitted for the record. And I'd now like to take just a moment to explain our rules and lighting system here. We operate under the 5-minute rule. You each get 5 minutes to speak, and there's a light system to help you. The green light will be on for 4 minutes. Yellow light will come on, be on for about a minute to let you know it's about time to wrap up, and then the red light will come on, and you're supposed to stop. Most people do, but we'll give you a little leeway there. Not a whole lot, but a little bit, and we operate ourselves under the 5-minute rule, so we'll restrict our time to that as well, to be fair. And I'd now like to introduce our very distinguished panel here today. Our first witness is Dr. Stephen Fine. Dr. Fine is the Acting Assistant Administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency's Office of Environmental Information and Acting Chief Information Officer. Dr. Fine joined EPA in 2016, and before that, he served at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in different positions since 2003, including the Deputy Assistant Administrator for Laboratories and Cooperative Institutes and Director of the Air Resources Laboratory. We welcome you, Dr. Fine, and look forward to your testimony. Our second witness will be Stephen Girton. Excuse me. Mr. Girton is the Deputy Director for Policy at the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. He has been serving as the Deputy Director since 2012. Prior to that, Mr. Girton served as the Regional Director for the agency's Mountain Prairie region from 2007 to 12. He also spent 9 years working at the Department of the Interior prior to joining the Fish and Wildlife Service. Mr. Girton served for 8 years in the United States Marine Corps, and we thank you very much for your service and welcome you here today. Our third witness will be Mr. Gundib Ahluwalia. I've been practicing that since yesterday, so thank you very much. And he's been serving as the Chief Information Officer for the U.S. Department of Labor since October 2016 and joined DOL as the Deputy CIO in August of 2016. Prior to the DOL, Mr. Ahluwalia served for 4 years as the Deputy Director of the Office of Business Informatics at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. We welcome you here today and look forward to your testimony. And our final witness is Mr. Todd Simpson. Simpson's a fine name, too. Mr. Simpson has been serving as the Chief Information Officer at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration since 2015. He's also served as the Associate CIO for the Senior Executive Service at the Department of Transportation and the CIO at the Department of Justice. Mr. Simpson also served for 6 years in the U.S. Air Force. We thank you for your service to our country as well, and we welcome your testimony today. And Dr. Fine, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Shabbat and Ranking Member Velasquez. As you said, I'm Steve Fine, the Acting CIO for EPA, and thank you for the opportunity to discuss EPA's implementation of the Paperwork Reduction Act. Congress has charged the EPA with enforcing several statutes to protect human health and the environment. In order to ensure the requirements of these statutes are met, the EPA must collect information from the public. EPA has just over 400 OMB-approved collections, with a total overall burden of approximately 174 million hours. This is approximately 1.5% of total federal government burden. EPA collections range from over 21 million hours for the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System program to less than 10 hours for the Mobile Air Conditioner Retrofitting program. The agency is cognizant of the impact these collections have on small businesses and other entities and works to find ways to reduce that burden while satisfying the responsibilities assigned by statutes. The PRA mandates that federal agencies follow a necessarily robust process to ensure that they are only collecting information that is needed and are doing so in the least burdensome way possible. Under the PRA, an agency must obtain approval from OMB before using identical questions to collect information from 10 or more persons, even if responding to the request is voluntary for the recipient. To gather information in such circumstances, the EPA must prepare an information collection request which describes the information to be collected, gives the reason the information is needed, and estimates the time and cost to the public to answer the request. Examples of information collections include surveys, permit applications, questionnaires, and compliance reports. At the EPA, subject matter experts and program offices develop ICRs. Each program office follows the process established by EPA's PRA office. ICRs are subject to a 6 to 10 month internal agency review and approval process. The agency's PRA office conducts an independent review of each ICR, and each ICR is also shared with the public twice for comment via Federal Register notices. In addition, the agency consults with a sample of affected entities. Agency ICR preparers and reviewers consider factors such as whether the collection is required to achieve the stated environmental objective, whether there is a practical utility to the information being collected, whether the proposed collection method is appropriate and efficient, whether less frequent collection of information would be sufficient, whether the calculation of the estimated burden is accurate, and whether the information is collected elsewhere. Public comments inform agency reviews, and after agency reviews, ICRs are sent to OMB for further review. The EPA is sensitive to the burden it places on regulated entities and uses multiple approaches to reduce unnecessary reporting and record-keeping burdens on the public. For example, both the Program Office and the PRA Office independently consider whether each part of a proposed information collection has practical utility, is limited in scope to only that necessary for the intended purpose, and imposes the least burden. Also, where feasible, the agency obtains information from other sources instead of the public. For example, instead of requesting some information from coastal states, the EPA obtains that information from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which collects information for its own needs. Additionally, the EPA is increasingly using information technologies to reduce burden by streamlining the information collection process. For instance, this year, the EPA enhanced the toxics release inventory, which is used by thousands of facilities to describe their toxic chemical inventories and document significant events, such as releases. The enhancements to the system include new features such as automated data quality checks and simplified password resetting process. These enhancements are expected to reduce average reporting time by 13% for each of the approximately 80,000 forms submitted annually. Another example is the new software systems that are anticipated to reduce reporting burdens related to public water systems by 23%. Further, the agency is in the process of developing a strategic plan covering fiscal years 2018 to 2022. The draft plan shared with the public for comment includes a strategic measure for reduction of reporting burden on the regulated community. This would be roughly one of 24 measures that would be tracked at the highest levels of the agency. The EPA remains committed to working with small businesses and other regulated entities to find ways to collect the information we need to protect human health and the environment in the least burdensome way possible. Again, thank you for this opportunity to testify. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much. Mr. Girton, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Velasquez, and members of the committee. I'm Steve Girton, Deputy Director for the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. Thank you for the opportunity to testify this afternoon. The collection of information from the public is essential to provide good government to the public across all sectors of society, but information collection is a burden for the public. Therefore, the PRA is an important tool that ensures federal agencies are able to collect the information needed while making sure that they are not arbitrary in how they do it. The PRA helps make sure we collect only the information we need to effectively carry out our mandates while minimizing burden on the public. The mission of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is working with others to conserve, protect, and enhance fish, wildlife, and plants and their habitats for the continuing benefit of the American people. Simply put, our job is to maintain America's wildlife heritage. In carrying out this mission, we collect information related to a wide variety of areas, including hunting and fishing itself, oil and gas exploration and development, import and export of fish and wildlife products, and federal subsistence. This information is an important component of our analysis, decisions, and plans. A good example to illustrate this is the management of hunting for migratory birds. The Service conserves bird species protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act through the administration and establishment of frameworks for annual hunting seasons and bag limits for these migratory bird game species. In doing so, we rely on the collection of harvest information from migratory bird hunters, which enables us to develop sound, science-based hunting guidelines. These harvest surveys allow the Service to gather information on hunting participation, success rates, and target species. We use this and other types of information to inform our regulatory decisions so that regulations result in sustainable hunting guidelines that also ensure maximum hunting opportunity for the public each year. This year, for example, we expanded the harvest of black ducks based on information from hunting studies and the Harvest Survey program. This model for migratory bird hunting has been a great success. Populations of migratory birds that were declining and in danger of elimination a century ago are now thriving, driven by coordinated federal and state management informed by data collected from the public. I'd also like to really emphasize the importance of hunting, fishing, and outdoor recreation at large. These activities are part of the cultural fabric of America. They're also important economic drivers that support jobs and small business across the nation. Our hunting regulations for migratory birds and other species are a boon to local economies in small towns up and down the major migratory flyways and other key wildlife corridors. To put it in perspective, in 2016, hunters, anglers, and wildlife watchers spent more than $156 billion in their pursuits, nearly 1% of the total gross national product. A lot of this delivered by America's small businesses, for example, guides, outfitters, marinas, tackle shops, the people who support those in the hotel and hospitality industry and transportation industries. The administration recognizes this economic contribution and has placed priority on expanding access to public lands and fish and wildlife resources. Last month, Secretary Zinke signed a new secretarial order to increase opportunities for outdoor recreation and enhance conservation stewardship. On the PRA, we're exploring the most effective and least burdensome way to collect information from our constituent groups that will allow us to deliver our mission. We recognize, though, that even with the PRA, information collection can be a burden on the public, so we strive to limit the information and paperwork requirements we place on the public, balancing our data and information needs with the associated burden. One way we accomplish this is by making a number of resources available electronically through our webpage. Hunters in certain states can now go online to purchase the required federal waterfowl hunting permit known as a duck stamp. These electronic duck stamps are available for immediate use, saving hunters time that can be better spent in a duck blind. The Service will continue to balance our information evaluation needs with the burdens we place on the public through implementation of the PRA and other efforts. We look forward to working with the committee to find ways to continue to collect essential information to support our mission while minimizing associated burden on the public. And we're happy to answer any questions that you or the members may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Alawali, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Chabot, Ranking Member Velasquez, and members of the committee. I'm Gundeep Aluwalia, Chief Information Officer of the Department of Labor. Thank you for inviting me here today to discuss DOL's efforts to reduce paperwork burden through compliance with the Paperwork Reduction Act. As the department's CIO, I provide strategic leadership for the department's IT programs, staffing, and services. The department is committed to reducing the paperwork burdens on Americans, Paperwork Reduction Act being an important tool for DOL and all federal agencies. In carrying out DOL's broad and varied mission, The department administers more than 180 federal laws. DOL programs cover workplace protections, economic security and benefits, workforce development, and labor-related statistical programs, and all of these entail information collection as outlined in my written statement. Some requirements help the department to hold those who do not comply with worker protection standards accountable. Others provide for employees and employers to share information to facilitate compliance, reducing the need for our intervention. Other information collections allow the department to provide important economic statistics that enable decision makers at all levels of the government and in the private sector to make informed decisions. In administering these 180 laws, the department actively seeks to minimize the paperwork burden it imposes on the American public while maintaining its mission and fulfilling its statutory and programmatic responsibilities. DOL currently maintains an inventory of 467 active information collections with a combined burden of 168 million hours. The Office of Chief Information Officer submits about 300 ICRs a year for OMB's consideration. I'm pleased to report that DOL's paperwork burden has remained virtually flat over the last 12 years. The last time our CIO testified in front of a congressional committee on this topic. As a mission-critical responsibility, DOL has established well-defined policies and procedures for implementing and managing PRA and the life cycle of each information collection. Effectively managing the life cycle allows the department to control the amount of burden it imposes. We employ 5 key strategies to reduce the burden on American public and businesses. Review all rulemaking actions, assessing the use of technology, routine review of information collection activities, burden reduction initiatives, and public consultation. The department also has a very strong program of compliance assistance. We maintain a national contact center that may be reached at 1-866-4-USA-DOL or through our website. The department's employment law guide describes the major statutes and regulations that affect businesses and employees. And the department's employment law assistance for workers and small businesses, our e-laws program, includes interactive e-tools to assist with navigating and interpreting the law. Online systems for information submission provide ease for all Americans, including small business owners. Our benefits.gov program, an interagency eGov initiative that includes 17 cabinet-level agencies, offers a gateway to about 1,200 assistance programs across the federal and state governments. Through the benefits.gov platform, disasterassistance.gov recently received more than 30 million sessions, during which 3 million hurricane survivors completed online applications for much-needed assistance. DOL has been supporting FEMA through record levels of online traffic to assist with recovery efforts and in the recent hurricanes that have impacted the U.S. As a former small business owner myself, I appreciate this opportunity to discuss DOL's effort to provide relief and fair treatment to all business owners, particularly small ones and individuals. The department is committed to reducing unnecessary burdens on all U.S. employers and the American public. Thank you. I would be happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Simpson, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Velasquez, and members of the committee. My name is Todd Simpson. I'm the Chief Information Officer for the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, part of the Department of Health and Human Services. Thank you for inviting me here today to testify about the Paperwork Reduction Act. FDA has extensive experience dealing with small businesses. For instance, approximately 95% of U.S. medical device manufacturing establishments have fewer than 500 employees. We balance the need to collect the information necessary to carry out our mission with the desire to minimize the burden on the businesses that feed the nation and develop life-saving medical products. To assist businesses in filing paperwork that is timely and accurate, we employ seminars, workshops, educational conferences, information materials, and contact via email and a toll-free telephone number. We also offer access to regional small business advisors and administrative and scientific support. FDA is making major investments in technical infrastructure to improve the customer experience. We have revamped our website to make it more user-friendly. It now presents the public with information broken down by product. It contains a section aimed at small businesses and includes an improved search engine. I would be happy to walk you through some of the ways FDA seeks approval to collect information for use by the agency. For collections of information in any form or format, including those contained in regulations, guidance documents, forms, surveys and studies, focus groups, customer satisfaction surveys, and message testing, FDA must first receive OMB approval. FDA also seeks OMB approval for extensions of currently approved collections of information. For instance, when FDA conducts notice and comment rulemaking to issue a new regulation, the comment period for the information collection provisions is normally 30 days. Comments are sent to OMB, and FDA transmits the information collection request, or ICR, to HHS, which reviews and certifies the proposed collection. HHS then sends the ICR to OMB, which files comment on the proposed rule and approves any collection of information at the final rule stage. For ongoing collections of information, such as those in regulations, FDA must go through PRA notice and comment procedures and request an extension of OMB approval every 3 years. For example, the regulation that covers the information collection associated with the pre-market approval requirements for new drugs has been approved every 3 years since the initial approval in 1977. FDA also uses forms as an efficient way to collect standardized information. For example, FDA has forms that healthcare professionals, patients, and consumers use to submit adverse event reports. The data from these reports helps FDA assess and evaluate the risk associated with the product. These forms allow FDA to consider what action may be necessary to reduce, mitigate, or eliminate the public's exposure to the risk through regulatory and public health interventions. FDA has several generic clearances in place for conducting focus groups, customer satisfaction surveys, rapid response surveys, and user and message testing. Generic clearances can be used when an agency seeks to conduct a series of collections of information using very similar methods and generally cover collections of information that are voluntary, low burden, and uncontroversial. The plan for the series of information collection goes through the normal public notice and comment procedures required by the PRA, but the agency is not required to seek further public comment on the specific information collection it conducts under the generic clearance. Instead, the agency may submit the information collection instrument directly to OMB for review and approval. Under the generic clearance for FDA focus groups, FDA recently reviewed approval of a focus group entitled Studies to Enhance FDA Communications Addressing Opioids and Other Potentially Addictive Pain Medications. This project is designed to provide FDA's Center for Drug Evaluation and Research with a better understanding of current knowledge, practice, beliefs, behaviors, and perceptions about opioid use, misuse, and abuse among healthcare professionals, patients, and other members of the lay public. Gaining this knowledge will assist in more appropriate, directed, and focused communication efforts aimed at raising awareness and educating the public. Thank you again for inviting FDA to testify. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. And now the chair will recognize himself to begin our 5-minute questioning. And Dr. Fine, I'll begin with you. Small businesses, stakeholders are concerned that multiple agencies are asking for the same information when filling out forms and other paperwork requirements. Is the EPA doing anything to coordinate within the agency and also across with other government agencies to ensure that the government is not collecting duplicative information?
We work as part of our standard process to check and see if other agencies are collecting the information that our staff, our programs are seeking. We look at some standard references, such as provided by the National Archives and Records Administration, catalogs of information public. Also, the people who prepare our information collection requests are experts in their field and are expected to have some knowledge of other information that's collected across the government. When we find opportunities to reuse information, that becomes part of our standard practice.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Girton, I'll move to you next. In your testimony, you mentioned that the Fish and Wildlife Service has many paperwork requirements for the hunting and angling community in particular. Does the service consult with small businesses in those industries to ensure it's reducing paperwork burden, and if so, how and how often would you do that sort of thing?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Chairman. Yes, we work very closely with the large manufacturers and the wholesalers and retailers at all levels of the distribution chain to try to get the information we need, whether it's on what they're producing or how they're selling that to the public. And then our interest is the take that is associated with fishing and hunting success. There are a number of forums we work with these groups to make sure we're reducing burden. And Secretary Zinke this past summer has had several high-level industry summits with manufacturers for the recreation vehicle associations, with hunters and anglers as well, to work with their trade groups on ways to streamline engagement with the federal agencies and support small business while minimizing the collection of information from the federal agencies.
Thank you very much. Mr. Alawali, I'll go to you next. Your written testimony states that the time burden for the Department of Labor's information collection request has remained virtually unchanged from what it was 12 years ago. How has the Department of Labor managed to double the number of information collection requests, but still estimate the total number of hourly burden to be essentially the same?
Thank you for the question. So the number doubling is basically responding to program needs over a period of time. So these 467 information collections that we maintain are like bank accounts, and we do about 300 transactions a year on them, right? Some of these can be to adjust it to mission needs or a change in a law, or sometimes reducing the burden, sometimes increasing it. So even though the number itself has gone up, the burden has remained flat over a period of time. And I would argue over 12 years, if you account for all the growth and the number of the population growth, et cetera, that's actually effectively a drop. But that's the explanation for why the number has doubled while the burden has remained virtually flat.
All right, thank you. And I'll conclude my question with you, Mr. Simpson. What's the FDA doing to make sure small businesses can more easily determine what labeling is required for their businesses? Does FDA have resources for small businesses to easily navigate the labeling system?
We employ seminars, workshops, educational conferences, information materials, and of course the toll-free number and help via email to provide access to small business advisors and any kind of administrative support staff that may need help with that. But as far as the actual labeling guidelines go, that's slightly outside of my purview as CIO.
Thank you very much. I'm going to yield back my time and recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you. My first question, I would like for the entire panel to comment on it, and Dr. Fine, if you could start answering it. Some have suggested that to make the PRA more effective, the volume of requests being sent to OMB should be reduced. This could be done by limiting OMB review to significant paperwork collections and shifting more responsibility to the agencies. Do you believe that delegating more authority to agencies on less significant information requests will help OIRA focus on bigger paperwork issues?
I do.
Without compromising the public policy goals, right?
I do. That allowing the simpler and smaller ones to go through without that extra step would, I think, save OMB effort, would also save our agency effort that we could invest in greater scrutiny on the larger and more significant requests.
And how would you envision this delegation to happen?
I would expect there be some criteria by which Congress and or OMB decide that below this threshold, in terms of perhaps number of people or number of anticipated burden hours, that perhaps delegation could be provided to the agencies.
Thank you. Mr. Gurdon.
We don't have certainly the volume and workload some of these other large agencies do. We do about 2.7 million annual responses and about 1.7 million burden on the public, totaling about 11 million in fees charged to them. That said, though, we've been working very closely with OIRA at OMB on trying to fast-track or do programmatic clearances to batch some of these data requests into logical building blocks. And this notion or strategy of them delegating some of that back to us would be, I think, a very effective tool to set a threshold or volume where the agencies had prerogative to operate within that window and then elevate the larger, more challenging packages over to OMB.
Thank you. Mr. Aluwalia.
Thank you. So we work very effectively with OMB at this time to sort of manage our paperwork burden. While it seems like it is a challenge to have one size fits all, right? So whether you're collecting things from 10 people and it's 100 hours, or it is 1 million hours you're collecting from 100,000 people, right? It has to go through the same process. So that does present its own challenges. And I think a little bit of more autonomy, while it helps, I am reluctant to prescribe a formula, though. I think the problem needs a little more analysis to.
So, but you don't see the value on delegating to the agencies, less significant information requests so that then OMB will focus on the big paperwork issues.
I do clearly see that value, yeah.
Yes, sir. Mr. Simpson.
I too see the value in that, and I guess I would defer to the generic clearance process as one of the tool sets that OMB has provided that we can utilize to see that through. But also, I just want to go on record, the PRA staff at FDA work very closely with OMB and work through issues as they arise on all matters.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Gurton, OIRA receives thousands of information requests to review each year. One way we could reduce the volume is to extend beyond 3 years the length of time that OMB approvals are valid, particularly for routine types of collections. Do you believe that the OMB approval timetable should be extended?
For some of the more routine packages we deal with, hunter success and number of animals taken, I think that would be very appropriate. If something started covering over an area OMB had a significant policy interest or a national issue that was important, they may want to retain that 3-year check-in to make sure there were no bigger issues arising.
Sure. Dr. Fine.
I agree with what Mr. Gurton described, that there would be some value in that with appropriate limits to make sure the public interest was served.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Kelly, who's the chairman of Subcommittee on Investigations, Oversight, and Regulations, recognized 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, and thank you, witnesses, for being here. I think sometimes we forget in government that our purpose is to serve the people, not them to serve our agency, whatever that may be, whether it be Congress or the EPA or the Fish and Wildlife. And I had a small business when private law practice. And so I started, and so I thought I was going to practice law. That's what I went to law school to do, was to be a lawyer and to do trials and to help people. But I spent an inordinate amount of my time doing bookkeeping, deciding what supplies we need, when to upgrade equipment, where to get insurance from and what type of insurance I needed. And so I wound up spending probably 60 to 70% of my time doing things other than practicing law, doing payroll for my employees, paying taxes. I didn't have to deal with the small business side of that, of filling out additional surveys. And I think sometimes we think it's not that big a deal. But let me tell you, I'm in the Guard also, the National Guard, and I was writing down just the surveys that I've done. I get survey requests all the time that I'm required to do. Okay, I don't get paid for them. I had to do my periodic health assessment online and answer questions, which took 30 or 45 minutes. I have to do a training class for the blended retirement system. I have to do sexual harassment training and all that online, which I don't get paid for. I had to do my credit card to teach me how to use a government credit card that I've been using for 32 years. I had to do training on that lasted an hour and a half or two. And I also had to do a travel, how to fill out a government travel thing, which I've been doing successfully for the last 15 years, because some bureaucrat decided that I needed this hour training. And I'm scared to death that we're doing the same thing with our small businesses. The purpose is not to get information for any of your agencies. The purpose is to make these small businesses productive. And I hope that at some point we'll understand that we have to do that. So what alternative means are you using to get there? And here's one other thing. If you had to pay by the hour for the amount of time that these small business owners had to do, and you had to pay them out of your budget, and didn't get any appropriations for that out of your budget, would you request the same information? And if we'll start, what alternative messages or methods are you using to collect information? And start with you, Mr. Fine, Dr. Fine.
Thank you for the question. And I do understand the concern, both from the small business perspective and as a federal employee taking the mandatory training. One of the things we are doing is to try to make greater use of information technology. There are ways that we can make it easier for people to fill out required information and take less of their time to do that. For instance, by catching errors right away so there isn't a back and forth. We also, when we do have a need to collect information, we actually call individuals as part of our process to see what would the burden be. You know, are there ways we can collect this information more effectively? So it's not just somebody in Washington making those decisions. We actually reach out across the country to affected parties, as well as having public Federal Register notices, so we get broad input as well. So we are actively seeking input from the regulated groups and from others on ideas. Also, we do check and see if other agencies are already collecting the information. No need for us to collect duplicative information. Hopefully that helps answer your question.
And one of you other gentlemen, and either one of you three, if you had to pay for the information to create a data bank, like most civilian things do, if they want data on something, they have to pay to create that data. What are you doing to make sure that there's a test in the public that says, if I had to pay for it, would I pay for it or not, to decide what we want to know versus what we need to know? Because those are very distinct things, and either one of you three gentlemen can respond.
Congressman, I would go back to my example of our wildlife management objectives with waterfowl. We rely to the best we can on scientific surveys. We fly a lot of surveys in the breeding grounds. We do a lot of GIS map, habitat, and we don't go out to the public unless we need to. The key missing piece of information for us is actual harvest, hunter success. And so we've put a lot of this feedback from the public on our webpage. Hunters can just let us know how many ducks they're taking. We also have voluntary programs like annual wing bees, where folks can just send an envelope in with some of the tail feathers from birds. We can, on a voluntary basis, collect that. We're trying to balance the benefit we can give the public with a stronger season each year, bigger bag limits, more hunter opportunity and success, and minimize the actual reporting in that comes in from our constituent groups.
And Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. Gentleman, time has expired. The gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Bacon, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and as a 30-year Air Force guy, I could appreciate all those training requirements he went through. Had to do a bunch of that myself. And thank you all for being here. I just want to start off by saying I'm from Omaha area. Our small businesses are the local farmers. Folks are putting up wind generation. I will just let you know I get feedback on all 4 of your agencies of that friction of them trying to perform and make a profit, and some of the pushback on the red tape and bureaucracy. So there is always those impacts on those small businesses, as you all know. Let me just start off with a question for Mr. Fine, if I may. At our March meeting, we had a witness testify that agencies require duplicative record-keeping requirements for different programs, but from within the same agency. An example is EPA's regulations regarding spill prevention regulations and stormwater pollution prevention regulations, where these 2 programs require a lot of the same information from the same business. What is the EPA doing to identify instances where it is asking for the same information from a business, but for different reasons?
Thank you very much for that question. The people in the agency who develop these information collection requests are experts in their field and are familiar with information that's being collected within the agency and should be familiar with the information collected outside the agency. As an example, the example that came up in the March hearing was, if I remember correctly, both stormwater and spill requests. And they are serving different purposes. A lot of the information is different. The stormwater is routine releases. It rains and you get stormwater runoff. The spill is an exceptional event. So there are a lot of different information collected, but there is some small overlap of information, so that in developing our programs, we have allowed businesses to say, we have a comprehensive plan to address one of the information collection requests and have the other information collection request refer to that instead of submitting the duplicative information. So the staff have awareness of that and take that into account when designing these information collection requests.
Okay, thank you. Maybe related to this, we have examples of our agencies ask for some duplicative information from within an agency. How can we do better when multiple agencies are asking for the same information? So we had also in March, we heard about lead paint and different agencies wanting the same information. Is there a way that, instead of putting the burden on the small business, is there a way to put the burden on the federal government to streamline that? And whoever would like to respond.
Occupational Safety and Health Administration at Department of Labor works very hard across agencies as well to make sure that we, in the initial stage itself, we reduce any redundancy from that perspective. Once we go further down, I mean, there is a recurring cycle of revisiting these, and we try and minimize this. They also, under the Small Business Regulatory Enforcement Fairness Act, SBREFA, they engage with the small business quite a bit. We develop special aids and things that would allow them to understand what is the overlap, why is it different, what am I getting out of this. I think that appreciation sort of helps a little bit as well. We work very hard to reduce that overlap. Recently, there was a WIOA, which is Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, that was passed. And there, Congress actually built into the act the collaboration between us, Department of Education, HHS, to go out and work with the states together. And that's why, in that particular case, Department of Labor is the only one managing the information collection on behalf of, to implement that act. So we do a lot of things. More can be done, and obviously, we look for the opportunities to do it.
I appreciate that. Anybody else? Dr. Fine?
I'll just add, the example that came up in March again with the lead paint, the two agencies are looking at different missions. OSHA is obviously working to protect the health of the workers. EPA is looking at the people who are living there.
Right.
So we're, in that case, focused on the most sensitive population, which is children, ages 6 or less. And that leads sometimes to different measures, different training required. Somebody who's actually working to make sure they are protected might take different measures than wanting to make sure, if you want to make sure the people who are living in that house are protected day in and day out.
It may be easier said than done, but it'd be nice if we could put it together and have one form, but I know we have multiple agencies, that's a hard task to do, but it does all fall on the small business person, often 2 or 3 people having to make a profit and try to work through all this red tape. So with that, I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you very
Mr.
much.
Chairman, I yield back.
Thanks. Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Blum, who's the chairman of the Subcommittee on Agriculture, Energy, and Trade, is recognized 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the panelists for being here today. I've heard during your testimony, you've uttered the following words more than once, that your agency strives to limit the information and paperwork requirements we place on the public, balancing our data and information needs, the government's data and information needs, with the burdens associated with those needs. Now, I'm a small business person. There's not a small business person in my district in Northeast Iowa that believes that statement. Not a one. Here's your opportunity to convince them. Go ahead, whoever wants to take it. I don't believe you balance those needs. They don't either. Tell me why I'm wrong. Because they just continue to grow.
Congressman, I hear you loud and clear, and you're talking about an aspirational view in the federal agencies and a commitment, and clearly we have a lot of work to do to convince our fellow citizens of our seriousness of purpose. But we also would stand by the work that we're doing and currently doing and plan to do to harness emerging technologies, to reach more effective partnerships within the federal family, to coordinate up front, and to put as much of this information needs onto automated systems or front-load it the best we can to keep minimizing the touch we have out there. In our case, to deliver our mission, some of that information is critical to help us set these larger frameworks to support a robust hunting and fishing economy out there. So our pledge to you is we'll do the best we can, continue, and we'll have to earn some more trust and confidence, clearly, with your constituents and our fellow citizens.
When will
out
small
there.
businesses see a reduction in the paperwork? Because that sounded very nice.
Congressman, we
Sounds good, sounds beautiful, but
we had
they're sitting there in Iowa saying, "Wow, this isn't going to happen. It never has in the past."
we had a modest reduction of about 25,000 hours of our 11,000 we were involved last year. It's a modest start in the right direction. We also reduced the financial burden by about $500,000 by moving many of these systems online. And out of a $11 million program, we think that's starting to show some progress for our small agency.
Can you imagine if we incentivized your agencies with bonuses in your paychecks if you reduced the regulatory burden on our businesses? I think the results would be amazing in 6 months. Anybody else? Tell my small businesses why they're wrong. They're going to see a reduction in paperwork.
So I was a small business owner. And I owned a small business with my wife, and as we were prepping, I was sort of trying to reflect when we did business. You know, how did we perceive the whole thing, right? And I've been on the other side now, so it's sort of I have the perspective from both sides. She reminded me that to maintain our relationship with FedEx, we had to fill out 5 forms a month. With UPS, another 5, right? Yet we perceived anything coming out of the local, state, and the federal government to be way more burdensome. And those forms are unwieldy too.
Because you have a choice to work with FedEx or UPS or the United Postal Service. The businesses don't have a choice. The government shows up with a subpoena in hand and a bayonet, and it's by force.
Right.
There's a big difference.
And there is that, right? But what I'm trying to just share my perspective. I think we probably want to. These are opportunities for us to put our case forward as to why these things are important. How are we protecting the workforce, and strive to reduce the burden over a period of time. Our benefits.gov that I was talking about, that knits about 1,200 different programs across states, and so all you have to do is go in and plug in a few things, and they will tell you which 3, 4, 5 programs that you would be eligible for. And then you don't fill out, or you don't have to go through 100 things.
Do most of these information requests come from Congress, or do they come from your agencies internally? Are we in Congress putting the burden on small businesses by forcing you all to collect data, or is most of this coming internally in your agencies?
So I think
Be quick, I've only got 30 seconds.
I think there is a bit of both. I would like to quote the chairman from the last hearing. He said, "We've met the enemy, and it is us." There is a little bit of that, but then there are program needs that are defined by the program areas as well.
I have 15 seconds. I just want to conclude by saying small businesses have zero resources available. None. Every time we ask them for a bit of information, we just taxed them. It's a tax on small businesses. And I don't like the word strive. Let's just do it. Let's just do it. My time has expired. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, gentleman. Yields back. And just to clarify on the statement about we met the enemy and he is ours, my staff wrote it. And I think they stole it from Pogo, which was a comic strip back in the papers before most of the people in this room were born. I see a few nodding heads. I won't point out who they are, but it was from Pogo. That was a pretty good strip years and years ago. The chair would recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Norman, for 5 minutes.
I just echo what Congressman Bloom said. I'm a small business owner. We're contractors and developers. I have to fill out paperwork every time it rains, the inches of rain and the amount of sediment that could have washed over the dams. I had to fill out paperwork on any development we do. Does the one-eyed bat exist? Does the hill splitter snail exist? It goes on and on. And like the congressman was saying, it's time to do something about this. Now, I know a lot of it may be out of your purview, but one of the great things about President Trump is he's cutting regulations. For every one proposed, he's cutting 2. For the small business owner, that's major. I've had it with paperwork. I've had it with having to fill out every form in the world. The FedEx form that you mentioned is a small thing. I guess my question is, how have you seen his administration in your world cut the regulations? And secondly, and this is for anybody really, secondly, how much is required electronically versus having to be put on our dead trees that are processed, that are being removed from our acres of land?
I'll start and be brief and leave time. EPA has completed 16 deregulatory actions following up on President Trump's executive order as a start so far. And in terms of paper versus electronic, we still collect a lot of paper, and we would like to collect a lot less paper. And that's something we are working to accomplish. And the strategic plan that EPA has developed for the next 5 years highlights that as one of the one of the methods to reduce paperwork and burden reduction.
Congressman, the new administration has taken very aggressive steps so far in the Interior Department. Our Fish and Wildlife Service, the first day, took down a lead regulation on hunting, and the new administration is continuing to pursue a lot of streamlining efficiencies. For example, Secretary Zinke just signed out a new secretarial order setting page limits and time limits for the agencies to comply with NEPA requirements. That would reduce these environmental impact statements and EAs down to a much more size and scope and time frame envisioned in the original legislation, rather than these very large products that the public has been seeing in the last few years.
We currently have a significant reduction in the information collection burden as a part of the annual budget process that is currently with OMB. We have an internal task force that is looking at each program area, trying to find areas where we can reduce the paperwork reduction, the information collection burden without affecting our mission needs. From an IT perspective, we almost, in fact, every information collection goes through that are we using IT properly or not? Are we using mobile devices or not? We implement a 3-click rule. Can I find the information in 3 clicks or not? Sometimes it gets very hard. But we strive to do all of those things in order to make it easier. And that's why I keep referring to our benefits.gov. I think it's a success story that we should be copying across the federal service as well.
Sir, I can't speak directly to the reduction in regulation under President Trump's administration, but I can say that we are doing everything in our power at the FDA to stabilize and invest in our technical infrastructure. We have a 3-year strategic plan, which we are walking diligently, which has a huge customer-facing piece to it. Our goal is to reduce duplication as much as possible and to make as many paper forms electronic as we can.
That would be a big help. And I'll just say that for every dollar that I have to spend filling out this paperwork, the time, not that you don't take the time to email and doing electronically, but it's just a lot less of our staff's time work, is a dollar that I can expand our business. That's a machine I can buy. That's a tractor that I can put to work. So as in your role, I would really urge you to support this president in what he's doing, because I've seen the benefit of it. And hopefully as he gets into it and doesn't have as many people fighting him, we can take it to the next level. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentleman. Yields back. And in closing, the chair and the other committee members would like to thank the panel for sharing this testimony here this morning on what your agencies are doing to reduce the paperwork burden on America's small businesses. I would note for the record that there was some skepticism expressed by some of the members that we've made much progress recently, or really that we will make much progress in the future, so prove us wrong. We'd love to see you reduce paperwork on the entire public, but especially America's small businesses, because that's what this committee is all about, trying to help those folks. So thank you very much for your testimony here today. I would ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit statements and supporting materials for the record. Without objection, so ordered. And if there's no further business to come before the committee, we're adjourned. Thank you very much.